Good morning. I'm Erin Moat. I am the CEO of Innovate EDU and one of the co-leaders of the Keep Our Communities Connected movement. I'm so excited to introduce my co-leader of this movement, Jim Larson from TNTP. Jim, anything you want to say this morning?
Nope. Excited to be here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're here for a webinar and workshop on responding to the Congressional Universal Service Fund Working Group's requests for comments. Today in this workshop and webinar, you'll learn a little bit about the request for comment process. Generally, we'll take questions about the congressional request in particular. We are recording this webinar and workshop, and you will get the recording. So no need to take screenshots or anything like that. You'll also get the slides. And our team will be hosting some additional office hours over the next couple of weeks with my colleague, Cam Benham, who will introduce himself in just a second, to share a little bit about how we can support you and your organization in responding to this request for comment. With that, I'll turn it over to Cam to kick us off. Cam?
Thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday morning. My name is Cam Ben. I'm Policy Associate with Innovate EDU, helping lead our policy initiatives across the organization. Laura, if you can go to the next slide, please. Today, we're just going to cover the baseline, as Aaron mentioned, of submitting public comments, what it means for you and your organization. We'll go over a little bit of a background of the Universal Service Fund, what it is and who it serves. Aaron will also go over some tips for responding to the specific RFC for the Universal Service Fund, and then we'll finish with Q&A. Next slide, please. So at a baseline, what is an RFC? An RFC is a request for comment commonly used by department agencies, government organizations, or in this case, a congressional committee to solicit community feedback on rules, regulations, or policies. It's an opportunity for you, individuals, or advocates to share their knowledge and expertise to guide federal rulemaking. To help shape federal legislators may not have the exact policy and expertise that you or your organizations may have. It can help the organizations or government agencies identify unintended consequences of proposed rules or regulations. And for this specific one, it shows your support for Universal Service Fund. Aaron will go over more about this later, but just generally submitting comments in support of the USF is a great step forward. After you submit your comments will become part of the public record and can be read online via the Federal Register by anyone at any time. And then the Congressional Committee in this case will review and consider all feedback given to the working group. Next slide, please. For crafting an effective response to a request for comment, it's crucial to understand the request, including all the provisions, priorities, and questions laid out in the request. It's important to also gather and submit data, evidence, real-world examples of how this particular USF RFC impacts your community or your organization, and structure your comments in a way that is clear, logical, in a clear, logical manner, addressing specific sections or questions laid out in the RFC. Along with this, some additional tips for compelling comments include be clear and concise, specific, constructive, professional. Overall, maintain a professional tone. Try to avoid using jargon, especially for congressional committees that may not have the expertise or knowledge that you or your organization may have. Next slide, please. And for this, some additional last tips is just knowing the docket. So in this case, you can submit your public comments, as you can see here on the right from Senator Deb Fischer's website, the Universal Service Fund Working Group's request for comment. Reference congressional authority, whether that's through the Universal Service Fund or any relevant agencies that oversee the USF. Consider joining associations or other organizations to submit joint comments or amplify other organizations' comments as well. Be sure to reference any previous laws, regulations. Aaron will go over the Supreme Court case that briefly constitutionally amended or constitutionally validated the E-rate program in particular. And then share with your community. Build broad and unifying support for USF by sharing your comments with the KCC community. We'll be sending out a form collecting comments if you choose to submit those, and we can collect those and send those out as well. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, you don't need to reply to every question. There are 9 questions here in the USF request a comment. If the questions don't pertain to your knowledge or expertise or organization's missions, Don't reply to them. Just try to stick in your lane of your knowledge and expertise to help guide your comments and maintain that your expertise, knowledge, and information is correctly formatted, submitted, and to the USF working group. Next slide, Laura, and I'll send it back to Aaron.
Great. So it's important for folks to maybe have some understanding of the Universal Service Fund, and feel free to use this information, particularly when Cam talked a little bit about citing authorities and citing sort of the foundation of the Universal Service Fund. So the Universal Service Fund was established under the Telecommunications Act of 1996. It is money collected from telecommunications companies. This is important because one of the things that the congressional working group is looking at is who contributes to fulfill the goals of universal service. If you have a cell phone, you contribute to the Universal Service Fund. You can go on your cell phone bill. Maybe you don't want to do that, but because you're like, oh my gosh, I talk on the phone a lot. That's what I always look at. I'm like, wow, I send a lot of text messages. But if you look on there, you'll see under the regulatory charges, the telecom companies passing on that charge to you. Really the goals of the Universal Service Fund were to promote the availability of quality connectivity services, so phone and broadband internet at affordable rates, particularly for communities and institutions where the cost of connecting would be disproportionately higher. Increasing access to advanced telecommunication services. When the Telecommunications Act was written and amended throughout the years, certainly the sort of advancements in technology are being considered by this working group. And so it's important to really think about those provisions. Advancing the availability of these services for all consumers. And this includes the development of specific programs that we'll talk about in just a minute, targeted at specific communities, particularly low-income communities, those who live in rural, insular, or high-cost areas. That includes tribal communities as well, so that the rates that folks were paying, consumers still pay here, are reasonably comparable to those charged in more urban areas, or those areas, frankly, that because of density, we're seeing lower market rates. It's about increasing access to telecommunications service. So last mile phone connectivity in 1996 wasn't necessarily mobile, but now it is. And advanced services for schools, libraries, and rural healthcare facilities, particularly those facilities who serve as hubs and nodes in communities for connectivity. So, very common for libraries to be used as the place that people go do their job search, or for folks to be able to connect to do their taxes. So, and in rural healthcare, obviously, hospitals use a lot of bandwidth. And so just the cost of connecting, or now with telehealth, really, really different. And then the purpose really was to collect contributions from all providers of telecommunications services to fund universal service programs. Let's go to the next slide. So there are 4 components of the Universal Service Fund. So you have to think of Universal Service Fund as the umbrella, and then there are 4 programs under it. The first is the high cost support, which is now colloquially called the Connect America Fund. This supports telephone companies that serve and internet companies that serve high cost areas to provide reasonable rates comparable to urban areas. And again, this has a lot to do with market density and competition. The second, the low income support, colloquially referred to as the Lifeline program. This helps pay monthly telephone and internet charges for low income customers. And those low income customers are tagged to things like the federal poverty rate, so on and so forth. Schools and libraries. Many of you on this call, I recognize you are educators, CIOs, leading big initiatives in education. I founded a school. We wouldn't have been able to pay for the internet without E-rate. And this is a really critical program. It makes up about a half of universal service funds. It connects 54 million students to the internet every single year. And so this is the program that provides telecommunication services, internet access, and internal communication connections to schools and libraries. And it's very specific to schools and libraries. And then finally, the last bucket here is rural healthcare support. This allows specifically rural healthcare providers to pay similar rates for telecommunication and internet services similar to urban providers. This is especially important given the growth of telehealth and, frankly, the diminishing number of rural hospitals and clinics that we see, and the over-reliance now on telehealth to provide support for those communities. Next slide. Okay, so just a little bit of background. So as many of you know, and who have followed the Keep Our Communities Connected movement, we're so grateful to our partners and folks who really came together over the last year across healthcare, education, and industry to really respond to an existential threat to the Universal Service Fund, which was 2 Supreme Court cases in the last 6 months, challenging aspects of the constitutionality of universal service funds. One in February was decided in favor of universal service funds and their recognition as an important government infrastructure. The second, the big one, was from Consumers Research, challenging the constitutionality of universal service funds, the tax collection mechanism, so on and so forth. That decision right at the tail end of June found in favor of the constitutionality of the fund. It's vital and important structure for access and connectivity and opportunity for all Americans, and also affirmed congressional direction related to the universal service funds. So now there has always been a congressional working group who has been working on universal service funds. It was previously led by now Majority Leader John Thune. It is now being taken over by Senators Lujan and Senators Fischer. And because Senator Fischer is in the majority, her office is leading the Senate request for comment, which is why you're submitting to her website, so on and so forth. Do know that it's a bipartisan initiative and a bicameral initiative. So there is a corresponding House committee. And so this task force is really looking to do, again, a bicameral, bipartisan approach. They are charged with exploring the current state of the fund. Many of you who follow universal service funds know that the fund itself right now, given bandwidth requirements, so on and so forth, is facing a real solvency challenge over the next couple years. And that data comes from a 2021 GAO report that's pointing to challenges for the solvency of the fund moving forward. And they're really looking to assess proposals to modernize the fund's support of voice, again, still telephone, and broadband services, particularly in the space of emerging technologies, particularly in the space around the effectiveness of the fund, and particularly around the contribution and distribution factors. Comments are going to be collected until September 15th, which is why we stood up this webinar and workshop really fast to give you the most amount of time to be able to craft these comments. Next slide. So while we don't want to coordinate comments and tell you what to say, I do want to highlight a couple pieces which would be valuable for folks to consider as they're crafting their comments. So the first is in those 9 areas that Cam talked about, contribution, how the USF is funded, comes up a number of times. And so some of the questions the working group is looking at is, should we expand or shrink the base or the rate? Should the base or the rate be tied to a specific set of indicators? What are additional funding mechanisms to ensure the sustainability of the fund over the long term, particularly as technology changes and particularly in the age of AI as bandwidth requirements increase over time? And then establishing some accountability measures. Senator Fischer and Senator Cortez Masto actually introduced a bill right before the August recess looking at the need for better and more effective data at the FCC level around the use of these funds, how these funds are being used, how much does it cost to apply for these funds, so on and so forth. So this data question is a really, really important one for the Congressional Working Group, and certainly ideas about what data might be needed or how to collect this data are really, really important. And then distribution. How are universal service funds distributed? Should they combine, expand, or shrink the number of programs, or sort of configure the programs themselves? Should they be collecting data on outcomes related to the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the return on investment of various both connection strategies and disbursement strategies? And then really modernizing the application and distribution processes to reduce the cost of applying for these funds, red tape, and actually shrinking the review period so that funds can be allocated. This working group is committed to a model which doesn't, frankly, move the fund into an unsustainable position relative to solvency. And so that is something to really think about. If you do nothing else, please signal your support for the continuation of universal service funds. Please talk about how vital E-Rate or Connect America or Lifeline are in your community. And if removed, changed, or diminished, what impact that might have on you, your students, your patients, your patrons, if you're a librarian, to you, your organization, and frankly, the impact it would have in your community. If you don't want to talk about distribution, if you don't want to talk about data, if you don't want to talk about contributions, that is totally okay. Talk about how important and vital these funds are. And while we want you and encourage you to sign on to coalition letters, so on and so forth, that align to your points or to your arguments or to your point of view, quantity here really matters. This congressional working group is looking to hear from all the sectors that are engaged in the Universal Service Fund. So if you write a 3-sentence comment about how vital this funding and these mechanisms are to you and how vital they will be to future education and workforce initiatives, that's great. And that's enough. So level of effort here, really important. Quantity of comments here, really important. And I'll just remind you of something Cam said. You don't need to answer it all. So don't spend time trying to develop expertise here. Really lean in to your experience, to your own expertise, and to what your organization would advocate for. I think we are now ready to move to Q&A. If you can, if you have questions, if you could put them in the Q&A function. We'll give folks about 2 minutes if folks have any questions around this. And Jim, anything you want to reflect or chime in on here?
Yeah, Aaron, I really appreciate what you shared about being sure that I consider articulating what impact potentially efforts to diminish or shift resources away from the Universal Service Fund could have on your stakeholders, patrons, students, etc. I also wonder if there's also an opportunity to be looking ahead, as you named, emerging technologies, including but not limited to artificial intelligence, seem quite poised to play a growing role across our country and within its communities and various stakeholders. So I wonder if there's also an opportunity to be looking ahead and forecasting for members of this bipartisan task force what the impact of changes to Universal Service Fund could mean in the near term, but also in the long term for communities.
Absolutely. We have a couple questions coming in. And so from our friend Steve, where might new revenue for the fund come from? Kim, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about various proposals that are out there in the ecosystem.
Yeah, there are a few. So one is, as Aaron mentioned, like expanding the contribution base. So this would include potentially including more telecommunications or even social media companies in the taxable base. It could also include additional or increasing the rate of the tax. Um, there are also additional funds. There's a measure to potentially reappropriate funds annually. So Congress would uh, annually have to appropriate funds for USF or change the rate for USF every year. There are also measures for accountability that are considered, and so making sure that funds are appropriately contributed and then allocated as part of like a contribution slash distribution model. Um, yeah, Aaron, do you have any additional ones? Those are the first ones that come
No,
to
but I
mind.
do want to highlight something you said, which I think is really important, that there are proposals out there to move this to an annually appropriated mechanism. And I think if anybody has you know, scrolled CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or picked up a newspaper, if you still do that, or listened to a podcast, you know that the budget process over the last couple years has not been easy to manage and maintained. And so just want to name that could be a very challenging way for these funds to be allocated, and also long term consequences for schools, libraries, healthcare facilities who, develop their budget, frankly, for the year ahead well before Congress gets the budget over the finish line often. So I don't think we can wait to September 30th, a month after or 2 months after school has started, to know how much money a school might have for universal service for the next year. So again, those consequences around durability and sustainability and stability are really important to highlight. So
Imagine doing this every year.
imagine doing it every year. Nobody wants that, y'all. Um, well, some people want that. We don't, I think many of us who have lived in schools and libraries and institutions know how important it is. Um, Kevin is asking us, do you have recommendations for sources on waste, fraud, and abuse in USF programs? We don't have significant abuse in our community, but refuting arguments could be helpful. Cam, you want to chime in here and then I'll clean it up?
Yeah, so a lot of this is just like the one of the proposals is advocating for consolidating all the existing USF programs, as Aaron mentioned, with E-rate, rural health care, et cetera, into one block grant program where it kind of combines all four into one. That is a idea to ensure accountability, also just to make sure that funds aren't used illicitly. Um, there are also data provision measures to increase data oversight and accountability to make sure that the investments have a return on investment, or the rates of speed are efficient and effective enough to sustain investments. And then finally, there's this other idea of modernizing the application process to make sure that um, funds are more targeted directly towards high need rural communities, low income communities, et cetera, so that funds are out the door going to communities that need it and not to communities that, quote, don't need it. So, any additional
Yeah,
efficiency?
I think we have a pretty big data hole, Kevin,
Yeah.
when it comes to universal service funds, which I think is why you see this bipartisan push for better data about the funds, the efficiency, and the effectiveness. The reality is it's going to cost more to connect Missoula, Montana, than it is going to connect Brooklyn, New York. And so I think there's been real challenges in thinking about how to tag this to market rate. I think there's, anecdotal stories out there always, those one-offs, but at large scale, there's not really good data since the 2021, I would say, when they looked at the solvency around what that looks like within the universal service funds. Do internet service providers pay for universal service? This is a hot topic. And in April 2024, there was a proposal for internet service providers to pay into universal service funds, and the FCC voted that down. And so, again, pretty hot topic. There are places where, particularly for VoIP services, there is some considerations of whether or not ISPs using voice or VoIP services could be required to pay and should be required to pay for particularly the phone connectivity, the portion of universal service. But as of right now, and when we talk about expanding the contribution base, ISPs are a hot, hot topic. Great. Last question is about ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, and how it was a huge benefit to tribal consumers. Is there a possibility that USF could fund something akin to the Affordable Connectivity Program? Listen, I think that there are lots of possibilities in modernizing the fund and thinking through things like the ACP structure as a way to potentially look at parts of the fund. And so I don't think anything is off the table at this point, even provisions like the ACP. I will say that the proposing mechanisms that allow for transparency, better efficiency of data, and helping folks ensure that, particularly around Lifeline and Connect America, that those funds, which are not necessarily going just to institutions, have mechanisms like ACP that, require income verification and that type of thing are approaches that I think the working group is both interested in and is looking at. So, Joy, it's not without possibility. Cam, anything to say there?
No additional comments. I think the ACP is kind of serving as a model to maybe as a model and a guiding principle, as Aaron mentioned, for the USF and like particular effective programs that helped give access to tribal communities to Wi-Fi. We saw the pictures of students sitting outside of McDonald's, libraries, etc. for Wi-Fi. We don't think that is the most efficient way of doing things and expanding access to the United States. So yeah.
Great. Well, that went by in a blink. We're at time. So I would just name that I see we have one quick question about DEA. That's the Digital Equity Act. And so again, I think that there are ways to think about what programs are vital, not just for connectivity, but for access and opportunity for all Americans. We will send this recording. We will send the slides. We will ensure that folks have a link to a form. Should you choose to submit comments, please share them with the KCC community, particularly as we launch a number of initiatives this fall to really activate around universal service reform, and particularly in supporting the congressional working group as we move forward. Gratitude to all of you on the call today for joining us. Cam is going to be hosting some office hours in the upcoming weeks. If you have someone in your network who wasn't able to join this call, if you have someone that you feel like could use some targeted support, if you need targeted support, and this is maybe outside the norm for what you do every day, Cam and the KCC Innovate EDU team are here to support you. Thank you again for your time today. Have a great Wednesday. Yay for Hump Day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.